Hello and welcome to this Saturday morning. Reducing unease of living is the second roundtable in a series of discussions on regulatory reforms being jointly organized by Scotch and Cuts International, two think tanks with their respective standing in the public policy space. We have with us Mr. Samir Kochar from Scotch Group and Mr. Pradeep Mehta from Cuts International. Before I proceed to talk about the discussion, let me invite Mr. Kochar for his brief comments.
Well, good morning. It's very delightful for me to be participating in this second of the series that we're doing with Cuts. And I'm grateful to Pradeep and Cuts for taking the leadership on a very important subject of ease of living. Uh, Before we move on to the proceedings, I would like to flag off three big villains that I think contribute to unease of living vis-a-vis MSMEs specifically. Number one, which is almost always going under the radar, is what I call RWAs, Resident Welfare Associations. This is becoming an increasing nuisance in the post-COVID world, where working from home has become a norm. And since you work from home and your employees work from home, then the local government that you end up dealing with actually is a bunch of goons who structure themselves as a resident welfare association, and then they assume on themselves the authority to tax you. They assume authority to police you. They assume authority to do practically everything. I mean, it's far more draconian government than any other form of government that we have, and it's not even a government. So that's the number one. The second one, which is related to RWAs itself, but contributes greatly to unease of living, is the local governments, the municipal laws, etc., that guide work from home. So if you have to work from home, for example, you have to be a non-nuisance activity. Now, what is non-nuisance activity? If you're a lawyer, you're non-nuisance, but if you're a consultant, you're not. So who defines that? So too much power has been given to local authority to define what is nuisance and what is non-nuisance. Now, practically everybody is working from home, other than the guys who are manufacturing. So in the era of services industry, where services form such a big part of India's GDP, why can't all services not be allowed freely to work from home? That's the second part. The third part is if you're working from home, then you have legislation like in Gurgaon and in Delhi specifically, and I'm sure it's true for other cities as well. You can use only 25% of your covered area as office. Now tell me, I in the morning work from my bedroom, in the evening I work from my drawing room, sometimes I work in the toilet. So which part of it I designate as office? All of it is office. So, these are, I mean, almost like colonial era legislations. And then the second thing that they say is that you have to have a commercial electric supply and you have to have commercial water supply. What am I manufacturing? I'm using air conditioning, which would be on even if I'm still there, whether I'm working or not working. I'm using my laptop and my mobile phone, which I would still be using whether I was working or not working. So how is it this an infringement on public infrastructure, anything beyond what my human needs are? So that's the second uh, flag that the local and municipal governance has to fall in line. And more than anything else, not that these things are ever implemented, it's the huge amount of rent seeking and unease of living that it creates. You are always trying to hide under the radar. You don't want to put your company's name board outside. You want to stay under the radar. You don't want to hire people. You don't want to invite people. Why is all that there? It's absolutely irrelevant in the digital era and more so in the era of work from home. The third biggest villain, of course, is compliances of the central government, whether every law that is made against the constituency that it seeks to protect, whether it's MSMEs, whether it's labor, whether it's women, it's taxation, whether it's salary. Now, we've all been looking at salary jobs being lost. Is it not better to have some earning than no earning? In today's era, everyone is working for gig economy. How friendly are our jobs for gig economy? Can my employees not be independent service providers to me? Can they not work on an incentive? Can they not work on a variable? Because I don't think anyone's going to be hiring people for a long while because you actually have to de-risk your business. So you have to spread it over a larger body. And that gives a sense of ownership to people who are contributing also, unless they work very hard and bring home some bread. How can they expect to be paid? So this whole concept of a welfareism in employees, taking it down to micro level or a small or a small enterprise level is an oxymoronic thing. Then there are laws that protect women, that if you're a woman, you have to be escorted home after 8 o'clock. Uh, I'm really missing Reema Nanavati ji, because I've had the pleasure of visiting Seva so many times. And, I think two of Seva women can actually protect me in the evening. They're so dynamic and they're so empowered. I don't think they need any male patronage to tell them that, okay, now it's 7 o'clock, so I'll escort you home or I'll send you a driver. So, so what has happened is ever since this POSH has come and some of the other women related activities have come, bhed bakri ek saman. So whether it's a legislation that's meant for the big MNCs or big Indian corporate houses or for a micro enterprise of less than a crore or 5 crore, the legislation is the same. Now, how do you expect them to comply at the same level? Same thing is with tax compliances. So everyone has to do GST quarterly return, quarterly return, quarterly return, quarterly return. Just look at the burden of compliances that is there. My chartered accountant costs me today more than my accountant does. Why should that be that? He's supposed to audit what my accountant does. So these are real issues that I'm flagging. I'm sure there are far more seasoned people and well-informed people on the panel who will be picking up areas that they think are important. I thought I will flag the three villains that I think. And once again, number one, RWA. If you are, Pradeep, making any report, make a report that takes care of this absolutely non-constitutional bodies that have been empowered to govern and right under the nose of the government. Second, of course, is municipal laws. So if there could be a model code of municipal laws. And then the burden of compliances. You could look at labor, you could look at women, you could look at taxation, law by law, and see that how these need to be eased out, specifically for MSMEs and smaller businessmen. Over to you, Gulsharan.
So that's adding an absolutely a ground up dimension to our discussion today. So ease of doing business being one. So do really we have the ease of living? So that's precisely something which is what is going to be adding a whole lot to the existing body of knowledge by way of our discussions. In fact, this has been really, to say enhanced in the current scenario of COVID-19, wherein the fear of missing out, and also at the same time the fear of being under surveillance by way of these three areas and three more, which is what we are going to be listing further down, has really added to the anxiety, and reducing the unease of living has attracted only blurred focus. Not only now, but regulatory as well, owing to inefficient regulations over a period of time. At the same time, lack of inclusive consultations at all levels of regulatory reforms. And this is something which, unfortunately, we have not been able to correct. Therefore, the question arises that what should be done, what needs to be done? This question we are not asking perhaps for the first time. We are going to be at it once all over again. So interest of workers, MSMEs, consumers, women particularly, require to be taken into account while adopting such reforms. Do we mean to say that we never had them in our mind when such reforms or such policies or such discussions been taking place? The answer perhaps is no. But then, why is it that it has only added to the unease of living? So today's discussion examines these areas in an attempt to come up with the possible mechanism and actionable recommendations to reduce unease of living and document these in a report. So we are looking at three areas in addition to what Samir talked about: how to enhance the scope of ease of living from merely ease of doing business. What incentives or disincentives are necessary to institutionalize a structured mechanism to identify, amend, and abolish suboptimal regulations, resulting in unease of living? And three, even more important, how to ensure that neglected groups like MSMEs, particularly in the current circumstances, women, workers, informal enterprises, become pivot of ease of living initiatives. So I would request all the panelists, so kindly, stay focused around these areas. We have 1 hour of discussion so that, we come up with concrete actionable recommendations. So before I invite our moderator of the discussion, Pradeep, a few announcements. As I already said that you will be muted, and whenever you're invited to speak, kindly so with this, over to you, Pradeep.
Are you through?
Yes.
You always make my job easy, Gulsharan.
That's my job.
But anyway, don't steal my thunder, as it were. Samir speak about it and you come about it. It's very good. And I would like to thank Samir particularly and Scotch Foundation for this very interesting partnership that we have. And this is the second of the series as we discussed earlier. Now, soon after independence, the Indian state vehemently focused towards building its industrial ecosystem and developing human development for its public. The objective for the same was twofold. One was to foster sustainable development across its social, political, and economic institutions, and to realize its constitutional mandate of raising standards of living for all its citizens. This is where I'd like to underline. Raising standards of living. Now, you can't have good standard of living unless there is an easy way as to how you can do your daily chores or tasks in a manner that is not threatening or is not something that you're running a hurdle race. Actually, most of the time, we as normal citizens, ordinary citizens, we are always running a hurdle race and tripping at times as well. In its modus operandi, the Indian state used to governance structure and regulations put in place by the British Raj. Let's not forget our legacy as such, which is often simultaneously, it also started enacting new rules and regulations to address the needs of its institutions. This is besides the fact that many of the old British time laws still remain on our statute books as a current law, including the Indian Penal Code and so on. Rajan Bhanavat is not able to hear very clearly. Can you check your audio system?
No, I am able to hear you, but slightly not very clearly. It's all right. I can hear you. Yeah, I'll have to be slightly more focused. So it's all right, Pradeep. You carry on.
I can hear you clearly. Yeah, fine. Anyway,
Okay.
yeah, not at all. However, the approach was such that the state kept on introducing new regulations without necessarily institutionalizing a mechanism to question the existing regulations or examining their impact, a point made by both Samir and Gulsharan in their opening remarks, whether there was a due process of consultation at all or not. The present condition in India is not different as thousands of suboptimal regulations continue to persist in the governance structure. These regulations are bane to the growth of industrial ecosystem as well as of human capital, India's biggest strength. We are talking about a demographic dividend, so let's keep that in mind. For instance, in India, there are 1,536 acts that create 69,233 compliances and 6,618 filings every year, which has changed 8 times a day during last year, 8 times a day. So 8 into 365, you can imagine the kind of changes that you're doing. This is a prime example of unnecessary red tape and compliance burden which needs to be addressed immediately. It has a direct impact on the ease of living of citizens, particularly workers, consumers, and low-income citizens, particularly those which Samir spoke about in terms of informal sector, micro entrepreneurs, etc., who have, for them, ease of business is as much as ease of living. The impact of these regulations goes beyond the personal lives of citizens and is visible in the low-skilled and low-productivity jobs. It's evident the way our industrial production system is. Unfortunately, the government's idea of ease of living has been limited to perception surveys of the quality of life in cities conducted by the Union Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and a nationwide survey on the delivery of basic services to assess households deprived of flagship schemes done by the Ministry of Rural Development. These things Rajan Bhanavat would be able to speak about. There are few recent examples of state action which count as a step towards ensuring ease of living, but are rare in occurrence and need to be scaled up. For instance, e-portals for service delivery. Common eligibility tests introduced recently to save huge time and cost for millions of youth job seekers. Similarly, amendment in the Essential Commodities Act ensure that our farmers can sell their produce anywhere in the country and derive a better income. There are many other good things which have happened in the past. Let us not ignore them. Getting a passport has become much more easier than it was in the past, for those of you. Or getting a ration card. Today, ration cards now also have portability, for example. So let us not decry the good things which have happened, but to use the same examples as possible inspirations for further reforms. So we raised the issue of RWAs. I don't know whether there is any law or not, but quite often let us look at it this way, that it is the people of a particular colony who decide to do something, then there is a kind of a democracy about it. Except it could be, it could be sort of mobocracy. Quite often it is a mobocracy. It is pertinent to note that the methodology for equating ease of business with ease of living is being questioned. And as I said, there's very little commonality between both, except for the fact is that when you're talking about a micro entrepreneur, then ease of doing business is certainly ease of living as far as he is concerned or she is concerned. We also found it more of a top-down, tick-the-box approach without much feedback from the relevant stakeholders, particularly small and micro entrepreneurs, workers, and low-income citizens. Due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, there is likelihood of a K-shaped recovery, which will further widen the wealth gap between the rich and the poor. There is thus a need to move towards an approach of regulatory reforms which is aimed at reducing the unease of living for citizens, particularly women, informal and micro entrepreneurs, workers, and low-income citizens. We require a separate focus because of the fact is that what we are going to see now in future is a K-shaped recovery. The rich will get richer and the poor will become poorer. Now, all this can happen only by making citizen well-being as paramount and applying a three-step test for explaining the legality, necessity, and proportionality to filter out suboptimal regulations. Cuts International has recently issued an appeal to the Prime Minister and Chief Minister of all the states of India on these lines. The appeal has been drafted by a small group of experts. One of them, Arun Mehra, is also here with us in this in the audience. And it was endorsed by 50 public interventions, which include Samir Kochhar and Arun Mehra. This webinar is the second in the series of the campaign. With these brief remarks, let me invite the panelists for the day. Given that we have 35 to 40 minutes for the discussion and another 8 to 10 minutes for the Q&A session, I would request the panelists to limit their thoughts for 7 to 8 minutes each. I would also request the participants to write their questions to us directly through the chat box, and we would take them up during the conversation. Let me start with Anil Bhardwaj. Anil, you have long been working on the issues concerning MSMEs, particularly issues related to the regulatory environment. Both of us also have been serving on a better regulatory environmental group of the Department of Industries Policy and Promotion called BRAG, an unusual acronym, but having said that, it has not reached anywhere at all. When you look at the process itself, and that example could apply across the board. So where do we see what are the kind of challenges for MSMEs other than financial challenges, which is not part of this topic, not a topic of this event? I mean, it's an extremely critical issue. Having said that, and how workers, consumers, and low-income citizens can be benefited through regulatory reforms aimed at weeding out structural challenges of MSMEs. And as I said, if you could also, abstract the impact on micro entrepreneurs, that would be very helpful. Over to you, Samir. Anil.
Good morning, Pradeep ji, Samir ji, Arun Mehra ji, and fellow panelists. I recently made a small contribution in the form of an article to a volume on reviving jobs, which has been brought out by Penguin. And that gave me a chance to do a deep dive into the issue at hand of ease of living. My today's presentation is based on that article. We are aware that more than 90% of the workforce and about 50% of national product in India are accounted by the informal economy. And one of the most important reasons for informality is the cost of being formal. If formality imposes a very high cost, the majority of small entrepreneurs, self-employed people choose to work informally. In India, the three biggest policy and structural stumbling blocks that I see, apart from finance and other regulatory issues, which stigmatize the informal sector and self-employed people and put onerous burdens on them, are three. Number one, zoning policies in urban areas. Two, electricity charges on type of uses. Three, house tax on commercial enterprises. Let me begin with zoning policies, which is, I think, the fountainhead for many of the problems. The dwindling economic opportunities in the agriculture sector and the rapid economic growth, fueled largely by the services sector in urban areas, is pulling masses from rural to urban centers. Towns and cities are swelling. While the urban population was, as you know, barely 11.4% in 1901, it increased to 34% in 2017, and it is expected to cross 40% by 2030. But urban planning is lagging by decades. Almost everywhere, municipalities and urban local bodies are in shambles. Most are understaffed, do not audit accounts, and are practically bankrupt. During the colonial era, which you also mentioned, cities were imagined in binary terms: residential versus commercial, model towns and defense, and so on, from the perspective of collection of revenue and taxes. The same thinking continues even now. Historically, India has lived and sustained its economic activities not in binary terms, but in working and living spaces that overlap in thousands of artisan and textile clusters across the country. That made us Sone ki Chidiya. Such a setting allowed family members to contribute to economic activity in a flexible manner, and also allowed the passes of on to skills from one generation to another through informal mentorship. This bifurcation of cities into residential versus commercial and industrial zones may be all right for larger businesses, but for self-employed people, neither does it make any economic sense, nor is it feasible. Meanwhile, organized professionals like lawyers, chartered accountants, etc., have extracted concessions for themselves from municipalities and ULBs to work from residential areas. The ordinary self-employed Indian working from home has become a criminal. The current situation leaves citizens with limited employment opportunities with a cruel choice: follow the law and die of hunger, or break the law and survive and survive by buying peace with authorities. But its very setting means that excessive limits are placed on establishment. Operating
2
from
minutes,
home.
Anil, 2 minutes.
Okay. So operating from
Thank
home, working from an unauthorized area automatically disqualifies them from joining formal channels of finance and government support. So they are condemned to operate at a suboptimal level, and employment is confined to just the owner. So that would require allowing the dual use of properties with the right threshold, like the maximum number of people employed, maybe a 2 or 3, or use of electricity up to 10 kilowatt. I mean, we can find the parameters, but the crux is that we have to allow the dual use of property. The second part is the electricity charges on type of use. See, before 2003, it was specifically said in Electricity Act 2003 that you cannot distinguish between the users of electricity, whether you are using electricity for home or for industrial purposes. But later on, changes were done, and currently different charges are levied on the basis of type of uses, whether it is agriculture, whether it is for home, or whether it is for industrial purposes. That has to go. And because that has become one of the most important, you can say, regulatory stick to beat the self-employed. And third is the house tax on the commercial enterprises. The moment somebody is seen that, you are working from home, doing commercial activity, the charges of house tax increases tremendously. It ranges from anywhere between 2 to 3 times. So people try to hide their economic activities and work at suboptimal level. So to conclude, what I say that, if we apply the 2080 rule, that which are the 20% problems that account for 80% of the burden, it is these three: zoning policies in urban areas, electricity charges and the type of uses, and house tax on commercial enterprises. If we address these three things, which are doable, simple, I think we would be saving our self-employed people from a lot of hardship. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, Anil. And I'm sure these issues have been raised by Sameer as well. The distinction with the electricity companies are doing, instead of calling it commercial, they call it domestic and non-domestic. So our own office is suffering from that discussion. But anyway, may I now invite Rajendra Bhanamat, former IAS and Chairman of the Society for Study of Education and Development, Sandhan. Rajendra, your tenure in government, especially in working with departments focused on rural development, animal husbandry, RECO, and NREGA, has exposed you to the intersection of regulations and ease of living. And I know you're very pro-citizen attitude in your governance as well, even in your administrative career. Can you elaborate on the pros and cons of the state's approach towards regulatory reforms, and also throw some light on the existing state capacity? That is a very crucial issue, which we have not discussed. Often the capacity of the state is very poor. And what are the challenges for reducing the unease of living of citizens? Over to you. Now, I just wanted to tell the panelists that we have substantial time, except the fact is that the Sharper, we would like a greater interaction. So all of you will be coming in again and again. Over to you.
Thank you.
Rajeev.
Thank you. So I'll try to stick to the time allotted to me. And what the topic is that how do we reduce the unease of living? So we have taken it for granted that in our country, ease of living is not going to be there. It is only the unease of living which can be reduced to a certain extent. So there is a connotation with that. But having said that, let me mention this thing that I have an occasion to work with different sets of ministers, different sets of bureaucrats, seniors, and at the ground level also. The one thing which I have noticed is that the people in the government, whether they are politicians or the bureaucrats, their rich prevails till such time there is unease of living. If there is ease of living and everything gets done for the citizens automatically, I think there is a tendency to feel that yes, their importance will come down. If a person's work is done without approaching a bureaucrat or a clerk or a politician automatically in a given time, then the people sitting on the other side of the table, they think that who will come to us? Why should people ask us? And therefore, the false notion of gaining importance, I think, is the main reason behind all these types of things that we see. Second thing I realize is that the government system is so based on distrust, whether the Britishers have left long ago, but even today you see each and any type of application that you have to fill in, any type of form that you have to fill in. So there is a tendency to make sure that it is so mysterious. Even the people working in the government sometimes do not know how the work gets done. And therefore, whenever there is a mystery, there is a demystification is the key word. I think if we were to make the life of a citizen easy in the present time, demystifying everything, how the government functions, how the work will be done. If you have a checklist of 10 points there, if anybody is applying for anything, if they've done 1, 2, 3, 4, take 4 columns, and then if the columns are not filled properly, if the information is not properly there, then I think it should not be done, irrespective of the fact whether any minister telephones or a bureaucrat telephones. And if it is done, then it should be done in time-bound fashion. Why it cannot be done? So the accountability part, I think, is somewhere missing. Accountability is missing because if they are accountable, then I think the system would probably take care of. So third thing I want to mention here is we should make simple laws in simple words in short sentences. If you read any law today, Pradeep ji and other fellow friends, that each sentence runs into 5 or 7 lines. So by the time you end up the reading the sentence, the first line would mean different thing, the second line would be different thing, and provided this and whatsoever and however and notwithstanding, all these types of jargons that we use makes the life extremely difficult for a common man to get into the system. Therefore, when the systems are mysterious and the language is too legalistic, and the simplicity is the casualty, simplification is the casualty, then you take it from me, the culture of middlemen or the touts is going to flourish. And therefore, if the touts and the middlemen are going to flourish, the people who have the money or who have the power of any type, they will be able to get through with everything. So life is, when we talk of ease of living in our country, I think we have to see it from whose point of view are we talking. If we are going to talk about the ease of living for people who have enough clout of different types, there is absolutely, if you ask a minister whether they is easy, he say everything is easy. We have done so many things for the people. You can go to anywhere and get the thing done in no time. If you ask an important bureaucrat sitting in somewhere in the government, not a retired person like me, sitting somewhere in the government, then the right people to know. I think for them there is no unease of living is there only for the common citizen. Therefore, I presume that today we are talking about the unease of living. 5, 7, 10% of the people who in any culture which prevents, it comes in the way of the one thing which, again, let me also mention, the time is very short, so I'll just make myself brief. We have always, while I was working as MD of RICO, we always used to talk about the ease of doing business. And we used to compare our ratings in the country or maybe the country's rating in the world. Where do we stand in ease of doing business? When we did used to talk about ease of doing business, the basic philosophy behind it was that as and when the ease is there in doing business, then I think some people will get more business, more money, etc. And then it will percolate downwards to the last man in the row. But unfortunately, it is, I think if I were to use another word, it is not trickling down, it is gushing up. If you were say the people who had money at the lower levels and the lowest level and the middle class, that money is going upwards. And that is proved by all studies, many studies that you see, the concentration of wealth moving from one part to the other, and the people who were not at all having unease of life and are having more and more, it is making, I would say, it is not, in my childhood, the life was easier probably for the people. He may not have electricity, he may not have drinking water very easily, but there was not many people to bother him for unnecessary things. Today, if you have a piece of land, you need a conversion. Somebody, Anilji, was very rightly saying, why do you need to convert the land? I'll just quote just one simple example. I was in RICO when the industrial land used to be allotted. Having remained director of tourism, I thought people did not need conversion for you making a hotel on an industrial land. But they said, no, hotel is a commercial activity. Tourism is an industrial activity. How could there be a tourism without a hotel? So the first thing which I took in the board, and luckily the board approved it, that yes, if you have an industrial land, if you construct the hotel, you don't need to pay a single penny of conversion charge. So this is, the land is the land. If you take the land from the farmer, it is agricultural land. Okay, I'll just wind up. So what I'm saying is the one basic thing, if one wants to put up a shop or do a business, do anything, one thing government needs to do, according to me, is that the government should get out of the way of the person who wants to progress. If the government comes in the way, in the name of helping the person to progress, it is putting obstacles in the path of the person. So getting away from the people, and you have the broad parameters. Finally, I would say we have too many laws, too little enforcement. Let there be a system where we have very simple, very few laws, very simply worded and very clearly worded, unambiguous meaning of the whatever we write, and then everybody will be able to take advantage of it. And lastly, Gram Sabhas are there, but Gram Sabhas are also just for the namesake. Unless the power of the people has to be with the people themselves, the Gram Sabhas or the Ward Sabhas or even the Panchayats, they represent the people. When the public representatives stop representing the genuine interests of the people, then the problem comes in. As Narega Commissioner, I thought what type of work should be taken. People would say you take X type of work, Y type of work, depending on what the Sarpanch wanted. So now I think, so the problem is known. Solution, yes, the solution we have to find. So just to sum up, demystification, have trust on the people, have dignity of the person, and then also this theory of trickling down is not going to enable, improve the capacity of the citizens group. Citizens have to develop pressure, and I think when the questions come, I'll try to answer these questions. But yes, the present unease of living is going up. Okay,
Rajiv, before you go away, I would like to.
No, I'm here only. I'm not going away. I'm here only. Yes.
And before you finish your current round, I would like to ask you a question, which relates directly to the unease of living as well as legislation of the Right of Public Service Delivery Act. That Act has been passed at the state level and even the national level. There was a proposal. I don't know what is happening, but what is happening in Rajasthan? I believe that the implementation is just hopeless.
Right. Let me say, we had this. Rajasthan was probably one of the first states to do this, to have this Guaranteed Delivery of Public Services Act. But question is, what does guaranteed delivery mean? If an application comes in, a grievance comes in, if it is put to certain, it is passed on to another officer, it is passed on to some other officer. You're just passing on the file or the application from one to the other. Doesn't mean redressal of grievances. If you were to go to the CM's website earlier or even now, you would say almost 99% grievances of the people have been solved. But that doesn't mean just passing on the file that आपका file यहाँ से वहाँ भेज दिया गया है, आपका पत्र वहाँ भेज दिया गया है. This doesn't. So therefore, there is a problem. Yes, people have to put pressure. The civil society groups now, I think, yes.
No, the intention of the legislation was very good. Basically, to improve the ease of living. Yeah, but it just ended up into the same bureaucratic quagmire, as you pointed out. It's a question of distrust.
Intention.
And I think a very important point which you made was demystification. Yeah, I'll come back to you later.
I'll just make one sentence and be with it. That is that intent, whatever the intention, ultimately test of the pudding is in eating it. Also, whatever best the recipe is, but it is not that type of thing. So, okay, I'll just reserve other things for the question and answer session. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving me.
Rajiv, over to you. You've been associated with journalism and civil society organizations for a long time. What, according to you, are the reasons that enterprises, workers, and government operate through the lens of ad hocism rather than long-term vision, and including distrust? I think a very important point which was made. We all know the kind of distrust which exists, and that is a legacy from the British Raj also. And in fact, nobody mentioned this, but many of the old laws and codes drafted during the British times were particularly onerous. And I mean, let's take the example of Article 377. That finally got shot down by the Supreme Court in spite of the fact that it went up and down, etc., etc. That is a classic case of what the British did when they did in India, but the same thing that did not apply within the United Kingdom also. So you can imagine there are double standards that we had to face, but there it did affect the ease of living of those who believe in a different form of relationships. Not that it is widely popular, yet there is a substantial vocal minority who believe in that. But that said, Rajiv, also what should be the modus operandi of the communication between government and citizens to address the unease of living? As a system, as a platform, there is, as Rajin said, I mean, ministers and everybody likes the citizens to come up to them and हमारी बर्खास्त देते हैं, फरमाइश देते हैं कि हमारे ये समस्या, वो समस्या, and so on. But what could be the best way? I mean, there is a good redressal system in place in the government. There's no doubt about that. But does it really help? Over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Pradeepji. Very good morning to all my fellow panelists. I think, I'd like to thank you for inviting me in the first place. I think one of the reasons for ad hoc approach in general is lack of awareness. That's why the problems start building up actually about regulations, rights, entitlements amongst masses as well as personnel of regulatory agencies. I'm not talking about the senior levels, I'm not talking about Banavat sir level. I'm talking about middle level and the gatekeepers at the lower level where people have a regular interaction. So there's lack of awareness essentially. Of course, we can also say that there will be motives and other things, but essentially it's lack of awareness that's bothering people. It's about the quality of regulations. What Sir Jeswant said that about drafting of laws, the cumbersome laws, the long-winded sentences. We don't have simplification of laws at all. And then, of course, poor implementation and lack of capacity building regulatory personnel also, because once they enter a job, they leave as good as they had entered 30 years back or 20 years. So there's no training, capacity building, or getting them on par with what is happening if any changes have taken place. Then, of course, difficulties faced by citizens in excessive
or even beating out.
Right. And difficulties faced by citizens in excessive redressal. And those very few cases where they do get redressal, those success stories never get told actually, which would inspire faith and show people that this is the way to go about it. This is the SOP to excess redressal. So those stories never get told actually. So those would be essentially the larger issues which are facing across the board. But when it comes to SMEs, I think Anil Bhardwaj gave figures. So I wouldn't say that, but you see, enterprises are generally, of course, bothered by lack of capital, inability to attract talent, and also they don't have technology access, they don't have digital knowledge, technical know-how. There are lots of challenges they're facing, despite that they're doing so well. So which again says the same thing, that if you just remove government interference, let them be on their own in a default position, they would do much better. So that goes without saying. But having said that, in this scenario, the short-term approach is a matter of compulsion for them than a matter of choice. Because when they're in this kind of an ecosystem, which is inbuilt with uncertainties, with roadblocks, so short-term approach becomes very viable for them. It also helps them in risk redressal also, because risk management is easier in short-term than in long-term kind of a situation. So that way they're better placed there. Similarly, workers, I mean, despite the laws and regulations being there, but workers are not able to access them because of the large percentage of informal sector workers. So there is also oversupply of cheap labor. There's connivance with implementing agencies by the employers themselves, and the disproportionate number of migrants is complicating the situation because they're more vulnerable, and those vulnerabilities are very easily exploited by employers. Jobs insecurity is their biggest challenge. All these factors do add to their ad hoc behavior, because they're looking at very short-term kind of things, and they're looking at today, not tomorrow. Actually, they don't have that kind of a luxury of looking at tomorrow at all. And of course, the lesson said about government officials, Manav Sir summed it up very well. They don't have junior officers don't have a need for long-term vision at all. Their approach is short-term, linked to their posting, tenure, and interest. So ad hocism, in short, is built into the system. So it does call for structural changes in regulation and implementation, that goes without saying. Coming back to this, all is compounded by the fact by the nature of the communication between the government and the citizens. There has been traditionally only top-down communication from the government to citizens, though this government has been focusing on also bottom-up communication using social media. But what happens with that communication, we don't know really actually. They're sourcing lots of feedback, lots of comments from people across the board on social media. But what is happening with that, we have no clue about that. So those stories need to be told that, okay, if these things have been addressed, what has happened, what has been the impact, that will inspire more people to come back with feedback. Because if people don't see anything happening after their feedback, it really pains them, because there's a loss of, there's an opportunity cost to them to even indulge in sending feedback actually. If there's a Mann Ki Baat and they send a feedback about the exams, so it does bother them if there's not a response to that kind of a thing. So those kind of things need to be addressed. And also the focus, there's very disproportionate focus on digital communication. Digital communication is an add-on kind of a thing in our scenario. But for the underprivileged people, even to use digital communication is a big challenge. So I'm just finishing it off. So, and the bigger problem here arises that we don't have a media and communication policy. We need a national media and communication policy, which sets up SOPs, which sets up processes at the central level, at state level, and district level. I mean, when we have around more than 700 districts, 28 states, 8 union territories, 20,000 languages and dialects in the country, we just need some bit of SOPs, a policy which is uniform, that helps government to respond quickly. So that's a need of the day. And with the fake news playing the role it's playing today, the policy is critically going to be an enabling environment. So I'll just close it because I'm simply running time, out of time. The media policy may not solve our problem, but help us in streamlining the feedback mechanism with citizens and also getting back to them with an improved kind of policy framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rajiv, for some excellent suggestions as well. Now the floor was requested to key in their questions on the chat box. Gulshan, can you check the chat box for questions? Gulshan, we can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself, please? Yeah, good.
I don't see any questions there yet, so we can have an internal Q&A.
Right. Now, Rajan, I wanted to share with you a personal experience I had the other day in terms of, you have policies, laws, regulations, rules, and practices, which is where state capacity comes in. Quite often, we did a research on the Land Act, and in 5 states, the same Land Act was interpreted and implemented in a different manner totally. I mean, just imagine the kind of change. The other day, I had a very sad experience personally. In my ancestral property near Chittorgarh, I was selling an encumbered plot for 5 lakh rupees, which was otherwise valued, market value was 25 lakh rupees. And that is all what I could get. I said, let me get rid of it and take whatever comes in full check. I told the buyer, I said, look, I don't take any cash. You give me in full check. What the sub-registrar did was to refuse to, now the stamp duty is applicable on the circle rate, which was roughly about 25 lakhs. So the buyer purchased that stamp document, which was required. But the Tehsildar or the sub-registrar, in his own wisdom, in his own stupid wisdom, said that unless the deal is of 25 lakhs, I'm not going to allow this registry. He was only concerned with the stamp duty and not the value of the deal. I may have sold it for zero value, or 1 rupee. How the hell does it matter to this? The state is concerned with the stamp duty. Can you answer this question?
No,
I mean, I'm sure you've come across many such.
Stamp duty.
I'm giving an example of practice.
No, Pradeepji, the
Malpractice, I would use the word. Let me add the icing on the cake. I say, who do we complain to about this fellow? So this is the ADM. No, Rajan, let me tell you about the icing on the cake, which is where public gets scared. So I asked the buyers, there were 3 of them. I said, can we complain against this fellow? He said, no, we should not complain, because if we complain, we'll get bad name in the whole system. So when we go back again to the same system, these are the fellows who keep on complaining. Inka kaam nahi karna aaram se. You see how the system operates. There's a vicious cycle. That bloody idiot is doing something which is totally wrong. And if we complain against it, we ourselves are going to put an axe on our feet.
No.
Sure. Please.
Okay.
Rajan, please go on. Carry on.
Okay, there are 2 parts of what you have said. One is that what should be the stamp. If I have sold a property of 10 lakhs in 1 lakh, say, then the stamp duty should be charged on only 1 lakh. That doesn't work that way. The problem is that I can say with whatever little experience I have is that the market value, the value at which the properties are transacted, on which the stamp duty is paid, is generally 30 to 40% of the market value. It is a well-known fact. And so wherever, therefore, what the government had decided is that they have fixed certain notional value of each areas of the land depending on the valuation. Because stamp duty is not payable on the amount transacted between the 2 persons, because that could be even 10% of the total value. So therefore,
no, I've said that. Rajan, I've said that we paid the stamp duty on the market value, on the circle rate, the rate decided by the government. So there's no point giving us a lecture on what the stamp duty provisions are. We all know that. I mean, at least most of us do.
So therefore, but I think this is again I have noticed it and observed it that there is a cash element involved in many transactions. It might not have been in your case, but there is a cash element involved in many transactions, and therefore, whenever you buy or sell a property, the broker would advise you to value it as per the circle rate prevalent there, and whereas the actual market value may be much higher. So therefore, there is a possibility of not paying proper stamp duty. But yes, if you are paying as more than the circle rate or more than the DLC rate, then the tehsildar had no business to say that okay, you cannot do it at this level. Now you said, who should we be complaining to? The complaint can be only to the higher officer, unless if everybody is a part of the nexus, then again there is a problem. So, but there are always hierarchies. Every officer one above the other. But yes, this has been, there's one improvement, I think, just for your information for the others also, that now the property can be registered at any place. It is not necessarily to be registered at the place which the property belongs.
I beg your pardon, Rajendra, I have to interrupt. I'm talking about a malpractice. I'm not talking about the system the way it should operate. I agree with that. That I'll pay the stamp duty as the government decides. But why should I sell the land as the government wants us to, on the basis of the market value, which I cannot sell in any case. I'm talking about what happens in the case of a malpractice and that you can't report it, because then you will get maligned in the system, and any other thing that you want to get done will not be done. These guys are cantankerous. They are troublemakers.
No. So what question ultimately boils down to this point, that a person goes to the office, and if a person has the discretion sitting at the other side of the table, should not have the discretion. That is what probably you are saying. The discretionary element left to the people at the lower level should be done away with. There should be no discretion that this is what it is and one has to do it. If the papers are complete, if the rate is as per the prescribed rate, then he should have nothing to do with this. And if he does say so, then he should be taken to task by his senior officer. But if he also becomes a party to the entire process, then I think it is an assumption, Pradeep. It is an assumption, and other fellow panelists would agree with me. Assumption is that the senior the person, the more is the level of the discretion is to be used in a proper, more I would say, very in genuine.
Right. Let me turn to the audience, Rajan. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think
there is a question waiting there.
There is one question. Is from one Mr. R.R. Mehta. Is the fundamental problem due to the governance accountability being used, quote unquote, to power vested due positions rather than for, quote unquote, power vested for public good? Let me start with Anil. Anil, are you there? Did you hear the question? Hello? Hello? Hello?
He's having some connectivity issue.
Yeah. Okay, then can I move on to Rajiv? Rajiv, did you hear the question or should I repeat it?
No, I can see the question. Thanks. I can read it. Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think essentially the intent must have been good, I would presume. I'm not working in government, but I guess essentially the intent would have been good to use it for public good. But since the powers, they themselves appropriate things to themselves, so they have used it in practice. It's again an issue of practice now here. They're just using it mostly for their own vested interests. I think that's what's happening here.
Okay. Before I turn to Anil, seems to be.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, please. Please go ahead, Anil.
Yes, please. Can you simplify the question for me?
No, see the point, which is it's a little philosophical, conceptual question. The fundamental problem is due to the governance accountability being used to power vested due positions rather than for power vested for public good.
They believe that India, because of socialist, we continue believing
We can't hear you, Anil. I don't know if anybody can hear him. Anil, let me turn to Rajin for the time being and come back to you later when your system is working.
Sure,
better.
sure.
Rajin. Rajin Bhanava, please. Yeah.
Just wait.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. I wanted to say one thing.
Yeah, you are on.
Yeah. I think it's. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
I hope you are
Yes.
able to hear me. Okay. So when Rajiv Tikkuji was saying, he mentioned two things. Government presumes that digitization is a solution for everything. I agree with him. Digitization is not the solution. It is the person behind the digitization who is the solution to the problem. It is not the digitization per se. Many times, like if somebody were to receive money and he would put his signature, then it could still be tallied. But now you have the passwords and the digitization. The person in the village doesn't know what is the meaning of the password. It is just somebody would take away and then take away the entire money out of his account. He would not even know. So I think the digitization is further going to divide the society into two parts. Unless the capacity of the last person or maybe the lowest level, unless that gets improved or capacitated by, he can take the best that is due to him. The digitization per se does not help. One more thing I would just for the panel and other attendees to address is, we have in the system of targeted benefits. Targeted benefits have meaning only when you know who the target is. In 73 years, we do not know in our country who the poor is. Unless we can define poor very clearly, many commissions, many committees, many laws, many parameters have been applied. And if the time permits, I can tell you a number of things, how the being poor and being BPL are not synonymous. Being BPL is one thing, being poor is something else. So if you become poor on papers, you get away all the advantages. And the persons about whom we are talking, the last 10, 20%, 30% people, they remain devoid of, or deprived of all the benefits which come in the name is his name. So therefore, we have been very vague in defining poverty. We do not know who the poor is. When the digital system comes in again, we presume, we sitting in, maybe some of you are sitting in
Thank
Delhi.
you very much.
In Delhi, we presume that.
Thank you, Rajin. Thank you.
These are 2 points. I think I would endorse.
Now
yes, that's true.
Right. There is a point made by somebody in the audience, Ujjwal Kumar, that India has slipped 26 places in the Economic Freedom Index, which impacts every citizen in a way. Do you have any views on that, Rajiv? Rajiv Tikku.
Yeah, I'm just hearing this. I think, well, it's a sad news, but unfortunately, we have been slipping on quite a few things of late, whether it's freedom of media or other areas. It's just in keeping with, unfortunately, those indicators. And this is also in keeping with what we're not been doing. We're not been making much progress on HDI either. So unfortunately, I guess we just seem to be not picking up on things. And in certain cases, we're falling back, unfortunately.
Rajan, what do you have to say?
Yeah, if economic freedom means, if I take the question, I don't know what the questioner has in mind, but if
the question is, let me repeat to you.
India slipped down from 66 spots to 105th position, is it?
105 to, some 107.
The freedom
41.
Of, I understand. So the freedom to
economic
carry on,
freedom.
I understand. Economic freedom would mean that if you want to start some enterprise, if you want to go into a vocation, if you want to do something of your own, is there a freedom to do this? There is absolutely, when you want to start something, It is not possible to do it. Even if you want to put up a shop, as you said, somebody said, if you have a house and you want to have a small place there to do something for your own self, you can't do it. So therefore, the economic freedom is not there. It is required, and therefore we have slipped down, because you need too many permissions to start something. And for a person, as most of a lot of economies in the informal sector, in the small, medium, and micro sector, for that to be able to get to do all this, even the GST, simple thing like GST. If a small businessman were to stay in the GST regime, then he has to hire a chartered accountant or a tax consultant to be able to file the returns every time. Earlier, he was able to do this. So with GST, again, it's a simple thing. GST came to simplify, but instead of simplifying, it has put an additional burden on particularly the smaller businessmen, smaller traders, smaller shopkeepers, the type of returns you have to file, online submission that you have to make, power coming, power not coming, sometimes
Very
internet
good point.
working, sometimes internet not working.
Very good point, Rajiv. We have to conclude now.
In the name of simplification, we are complicating the life of the person. That is what I'm saying. So Pradeep ji, in the name of simplification, let us not complicate the thing. That's what I think. Yeah.
No, the point which you made about demystification is something which we've been arguing for a long time. And I take that point as a part of our proceedings. Anil, can you speak? Anil?
Can you hear me
Anil
now?
Bhardwaj.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quickly, you're the last speaker.
Okay. Now, let me comment on the ease of doing business, especially I think the index that you had just mentioned about Freedom Index.
Economic freedom.
Economic freedom index. See, I mean, we need to take them with a pinch of salt. We jumped several scores points in ease of doing business. But let me also share that Russia did even better than us. And once Putin decided, I think in 2014, that we need to come within first 50, and somehow they created a system that they come within under 50. So I think the game could be the system could be gamed. That's the point, in the index system. That's not very important. What is important is that what people are saying on the ground. Is it easy to start business? Is it easy to run business? Is it easy to close business? And that ultimately comes up when there are more births than deaths of the businesses. And that is not happening in countries like India, where it continues to be difficult to start a business, more difficult to run a business, and extremely difficult to close the business. That remains true.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. In fact, the latest EODB rankings of the World Bank have been held back because of the fact is that there have been a lot of problems with that. With that, let me now conclude and thank each and every panelist, and particularly Reema Nanavati in her absence, and hope she gets well soon. And I would like to hand over the proceedings to Amol Kulkarni to propose a formal vote of thanks, and Rohan Kochar. Amol.
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mehta and Dr. Dhanjal. On behalf of CUTS, please allow me to thank Scotch Group, particularly Mr. Samir Kochar, for partnering with us for this webinar series on regulatory reforms. We also thank all panelists and participants for engaging in an enthralling discussion. I will now attempt to summarize key points from the discussion. First, institutions like resident welfare associations, municipal bodies, and frequent compliances under law, labor, taxation, and other laws, often working outside their remit, create hardships for MSMEs and entrepreneurs. Secondly, cost of becoming formal is significant. We often stigmatize the informal. Norms like zoning policies, electricity charges on type of use, and house tax on commercial enterprises create unease of living for self-employed people and small entrepreneurs. Third, there is a false notion of gaining importance amongst government officials, which is based on distrust, particularly at the middle and lower level of governance. There is lack of accountability. Simplification is causality and touts flourish. Ease of living is not trickling down, but gushing up, and economic divide is increasing. Demystifying the functioning of government is required. Fourth, a good and workable redress systems for common citizens is required. Capacity building of regulatory personnel is must. We need to inspire faith and confidence in government systems. Simple, few, and unambiguous laws with short sentences and a focus on implementation are important for simplicity. Citizen-driven accountability measures are necessary, and government should get out of the way of people who want to make progress. Fifth, ad hocism in government systems is prevalent and results in ambiguity and uncertainty. Disproportionate focus on digital communications resulting in digital divide, and there is a need for a national media and communications policy to ensure two-way interaction with government and citizen. Sixth, it is important to hear voices from the ground, particularly on opening, continuing, and closing of businesses, and hearing feedback from small and medium enterprises. Finally, we assure all of you that we will keep on working to build narrative for reducing the unease of living and enhancing the ease of living for citizens, workers, and micro entrepreneurs. We are working towards institutionalizing reforms like regulatory impact assessment and cost benefit analysis to ensure regulatory certainty, clarity, and and uh, enhancing accountability. We'll also soon summarize the discussions in the report for adequacy with policymakers and influencers. With this, we thank you again for participating in the webinar, and over to Dr. Dhanjal, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Just a minute. Is Rohan there?
Rohan is there, but he's having very bad throat, so he's been.
Okay, fine. So let's close the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pradeep ji, Rajiv ji, Gulshan, Dr. Gulshan. Thank you all very much, and all the attendants. Thank you.
A great discussion. Taking the feedback from a cross section of the discussion that we had. It boils down to what very succinctly summed up by Amol there. Compliances, poor regulation. We know these are the problems, but the discussions are generally held to discuss and rediscuss the problem. So any discussion is fruitful only if we have a way out of these problems. So there are many things that have emerged out of this discussion. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We will try to take the ad hocism out of policy making. We'll try to reduce the number of compliances as it's been discussed, and the poor regulation, particularly in the current context of COVID-19, which is making extremely difficult for the enterprises to continue to operate from the residential areas, from the non-commercial areas, and reducing the burden of A, compliance, B, taxation, and at the same time making it easy for them, like the way Pradeep, you said, it's going to be a pay type recovery. How is it that we convert it to our advantage at V-shape? So with this, my heartfelt thanks to everyone, and look forward to seeing you once all over again, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.